Welcome to KSAT Common Grounds, a show about hot topics affecting South Texas. We're here at Commonwealth Coffee off of Jones Avenue near downtown.
Coffee and conversation, and we're going to start tonight with a conversation about the Republican runoff in District 23 between incumbent Congressman Tony Gonzales and his challenger Brandon Herrera. I talked to them both. I want to talk about the runoff. Obviously coming up, you've been in a runoff before, but never as the incumbent.
Sure.
Is it a different feel for you this time around, and are you surprised you find yourself in a runoff?
Oh, I'm not surprised to find myself in a runoff. Texas 23 is a tough district. It's larger than 30 states, 29 counties, stretches from San Antonio to El Paso, 2/3 of the Texas-Mexico border. You're really representing 4 different types of people. And I'd also say too, runoffs are tough. Runoffs are brutal. I've been joking. Runoff, as long as you're willing to not sleep, not eat, work your guts out, you'll be just fine. And that's exactly what it takes. It's like a block by block. But in a weird way, you get stronger. I know it because I've been in a runoff. I've won a runoff. If you're willing to put the work in, you're willing to listen to people, you're willing to basically say, hey, look, I won every county the first time. I got nearly 50%, but I didn't get 50%, and kind of be humble about it and go, what do I have to do to earn your vote? Maybe have these discussions and be realistic about it. You can get a lot stronger out of it.
Did you expect to be here? When you started this whole thing, did you expect that you would take Tony Gonzales to a runoff?
It's an interesting question because I wouldn't have gotten involved in the race had I thought that this was impossible. Like, I never would have thrown my hat in the ring if I thought it was just a pipe dream to waste time and money. I always knew that there was a path to victory on this, but it was still kind of wild watching the results come in on March 5th and realizing, oh man, we were right. You know, it was an interesting moment, and it lets me know that I'm not alone in a lot of the frustrations that I had that led me here.
Is that what got you into this race? Talk about some of those frustrations that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So I never had any interest in running for office of any kind. You can clearly see I've lived my life in a way that I never thought I would ever be running for any sort of public office. But unfortunately, as a constituent of Tony's, as a resident of District 23 here in San Antonio, I just got really frustrated with the votes that my congressman was making. And I thought that, you know, you have a Texas Republican, that meant something, that he was going to be an actual conservative fighter. And especially with me being disappointed with some of the votes that he's made there, made me really start paying attention to some of the votes he was making in other places. And I realized that this is just not somebody who represents my values. And I was worried that he was going to get away with continuing to do that.
Going through your second term here, when it comes to your opponent, this is a guy that I would call a non-traditional candidate. What is the biggest difference between you and him? I mean, now that you know who you're taking on in the runoff, have you sharpened your criticism when it comes to Brandon Herrera?
Brandon Herrera is not from here. Brandon Herrera thinks Trump can't win the election. Brandon Herrera makes fun of Greg Abbott being in a wheelchair. Brandon Herrera makes fun of veterans. Brandon Herrera is 28 years old, and the only job he's ever had is a YouTuber. When I was 28 years old, I'd already been in the military 10 years. I'd already served in Iraq and Afghanistan 5 years. I already had 2 kids, and I was living my life. So age, you know, is part of it. He just has no experience. He thinks being a comedian he's auditioning to be a comedian for Texas 23. That's not what our district needs nor wants. Our district needs to have a representative that shows up in good times and bad. And when you're making these decisions, to listen to the people and ultimately deliver.
The Second Amendment has been his big stance that he has gone through, not only as a candidate, but even before then. How do you delineate yourself from him? What is the biggest difference between you and Brandon Herrera?
You look at my voting record, my voting record is very strong on the Constitution. Once again, I swore an oath to the Constitution at 18 years old, and I've never stopped doing that, right? And I've worked really hard to go, look, we can protect the Constitution and we can protect our kids. It does not have to be either or. And anyone trying to sell you that it does is lying to you, because that's where the politics come into place. When somebody's spinning this, that, or the other. The facts are this: I have voted against an assault weapons ban, right? Very conservative stance. I've taken a lot of flack from my left flank, if you will, for that. I voted against raising the age limit from 18 to 21. Once again, very conservative stance. I voted against universal background checks. A lot of these different positions, I've taken those votes. I'm not talking about it. I've taken those votes. I've stood up there and do those things, and I will continue to do that. But I also believe, once again, our kids deserve to feel safe in their school.
Any gun legislation that you would support?
I would support repealing a lot of the laws that we have on the books. Specifically, one thing that I would love to get pushed across is I would love to see constitutional carry, which has been making a great movement throughout the states. I mean, constitutional carry was a pipe dream in the 90s, and then now more states than not have constitutional carry in some degree or the other, Texas being one of them recently. And so I'd love to see something like that pushed, because that's legislation that will actually make us safer.
Yeah, well, Uvalde is part of the district, part of District 23.
Yes, sir.
What happened with Tony's vote came right after what happened at Robb Elementary. How do you balance that out? The fact that we do have people that are using guns to do unspeakable things, to take children's lives,
Yeah.
with your strong-held constitutional beliefs in the Second Amendment. How does that balance out?
So I don't think that things are mutually exclusive. I think that there are things that we can and should be doing to protect children. Things like armed school resource officers, better security, different things like that. I think there are ways you can make children safer, because we're all, the left likes to paint a lot of things that we don't care about children. Of course we care.
Yeah.
Everybody cares about children.
Yeah.
But I think that there's ways that you can help secure that future without having to break or mold the Constitution to the way that you want to paint certain things. I think we can do that, and in general, and this is kind of a more unpopular side of that argument, but it's one that I take. If you look at the statistics of it, one of the biggest outliers when it comes to the kind of people who commit these actions, they're not things that red flag laws or any of these background checks would actually solve. Most of these people, in fact, the vast majority of these mass shooters, never had a crime. They didn't have a felony on record. They could have passed every single background check you throw at them. They would have passed all of it. Enhanced checks won't solve it. The only thing that does solve it is the involvement of the family. Because the number one outlier, if you want to talk about SSRIs, that's its own kind of issue, but
Yeah.
The number one thing is broken homes.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem in this country, and I think this is one of the many ways that problem is showing itself.
This is our power panel. Welcome to it. We have DeMonte Alexander, Molly Cox, Kevin Wolf. Thanks for being here for this very first episode.
I call you the OG panel, so OG power panel.
We've upgraded.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, because there will be others.
So we just heard from Tony Gonzales. He's clearly worried about the race with Brandon Herrera. Should he be, DeMonte?
I think so. I think you take every race serious, right, Kevin? You take every race serious, no matter what lead you have or what resources you have. You take every candidate serious, and I think, especially with the support of Governor Abbott, we've seen the impacts of his support and what it does financially to these races. Obviously, it pushed him to a runoff, so I'd be very concerned.
Molly?
Yeah, I agree. I think any incumbent who goes into a runoff is typically got an anti-incumbent thing that they have to overcome, and that's what he's going for at this point. I don't know that an anti-incumbent necessarily translates to a pro his opponent, but we'll see.
Do you think Tony's in trouble?
Sure, absolutely, and it's as these folks said, there's only two ways to run a race: unopposed or afraid. Okay, and so when you have an incumbent who ends up in a runoff, the break point that you really want is 45. Well, Tony's right at 45, which tells you, okay, yeah, that you're in trouble. All right, and it's not, when you look at what's going on here across the country, the way races are run, especially in the Republican primary, it is much less about actual governance and more about extreme issues, and how can you beat each other up over those extreme issues.
Do you feel like this race is a reflection of, if not only the divide within the GOP, the contrast that exists? You've got an incumbent, which for some people, to your point, Molly, is a four-letter word. And then you've got their opponent is somebody who is not a politician.
And unfortunately, I think for us as a country, that's become the way to run these races. Okay, as I said earlier, it's not about what you want to do or how you're going to actually govern. It's about what you have to do in order to get elected. And unfortunately, what I see it doing is it is driving out what I call, rational individuals in government. We're driving out the Tonys of the world. We're just like we drove out the Joe Strausses of the world. Okay, and unless you are willing to go to those extremes during the primary process, your chances of getting through that primary process and to the general diminish greatly, as we've seen in this most recent election.
Yeah, you're even talking through, we're talking Tony Gonzales as a moderate, and I'm putting that in air quotes, just support of gay marriage, just saying, hey, maybe we should have some gun control after Uvalde, right? Hey, what you're trying to do on the border is entirely too far, right? What are you trying to do? So we say moderate, it's not like he swung so far over that we're looking at somebody who should be switching parties. And that's how extreme the extreme party, the extreme part of GOP has gone, that you can't even sort of find that rational space anymore.
Now, I'm not going to let you off the hook too much. A level of this is happening on the left as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If we were talking about that race, we could be.
And we'll talk about it after the break. How about that?
What I'll also add is, I think effectively representation is gone, right? Because it's now led from the governor's office. So what your community and constituents say doesn't really matter too much if it's opposing the governor's opinions, right? So we have to talk about that as well.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Henry Cuellar, the Democratic and Republican primaries, and much more. You're watching KSAT's Common Grounds. We're going to call this segment the 4-minute free-for-all. We're going to start. I'm going to start with the first topic, but I also want to know what you guys want to talk about. Henry Cuellar, first of all, been indicted. He's in federal bribery charges, all kinds of things going on. There are a lot of people who think he should resign, but notably, no Democrats have said that. Do you think he should resign?
I would say that would be up to his constituents. We've seen this before, where obviously our...
That's good answer, good answer.
Yeah.
Well, we've seen this before in Austin, right? When you're an elected official, it really doesn't matter what my opinion is. It's a matter of the voters that you're accountable to. And so I guess we'll have to wait and see that. I will talk about the implications of him resigning or not. That seat is, in a lot of ways, is a big funding stream from the federal government to us, to Bexar
Absolutely.
County. And so that impacts Bexar County. It also impacts the city of Laredo drastically, right? And so I'm not saying because of that we should forgive those types of things, but I think that the voters will ultimately decide that unless he's in jail.
It is innocent until proven guilty.
It is 100%, and I would also go, we were just talking about Tony Gonzales as an incumbent running, how hard it is to overcome. Henry Cuellar was an incumbent in a primary, and then had to go into a runoff and actually overcame it and made it into office even after we knew that the FBI raid happened. So now we have the indictment. Even just the stories that are coming out now. I'm assuming this will stop some political consultant from being quoted all the time based on what we've read so far, but maybe not.
The one that's pled guilty already?
Maybe not.
The one that's cooperating with authorities. Yeah.
So look, I believe in our justice system, even though it's flawed. Okay.
Good answer.
It is true. And look, usually where there's smoke, there's fire. Okay. But to DeMonte's point earlier, that's not for us to decide. That's for the constituents of that particular district to decide. And they need their opportunity to make that decision, and that will happen here in the not too distant future.
So Cuellar controversy aside, this is the free-for-all portion, I believe, right? What are the biggest topics on your mind as we head into this runoff? Any issues that, whether runoff or otherwise, that are standing out to you?
So are you asking from a true governance standpoint? Or
I'm asking for the standpoint you'd like to share.
Okay, so I'm going to share from a governance standpoint. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. We know that we have an immigration and border security issues. Notice I've made that plural. They are two separate yet linked issues. And both sides spend all of their time arguing about one or the other and why it's a bad thing, and don't spend any time figuring out how to fix it. And so if you ask me to point out one of the biggest things that this country needs to address, I just gave you my answer.
Molly.
I'm interested in the fact that, like in the primary, what we saw was a pretty big tell on a really hard swing on some of these, Tony Gonzales aside, right? Like that race aside, multiple times, money that was spent, particularly pushed by Governor Abbott, really shifted this race, which is where we have in a runoff. The runoff will be interesting to watch to see if this will ultimately, in our elections, really hit something and make a shift in changes of like, is that now a Democrat running that really could win over a Republican?
In terms of education, we all know Steve Allison, what he's done for the school district, who he means to his community. And if we have a shakeup, say for Governor Abbott is Attorney General, and now the Speaker of the House, new Speaker of the House, all this stuff shakes up. But I think the biggest issue we need to address is how we fund education and how that impacts to workforce development, all those things. For example, right now it's attendance. Why is it not enrollment? And so I think that's a big conversation that needs to be taken up.
Well, you know, what Molly just said has happened in this last election cycle, all but guarantees that public education in the state of Texas is going to change in some form or fashion.
Well, I'm glad you guys brought that up to end the free-for-all, because next week we're doing interviews with John Kemple and Alan Schoolcraft on different sides of public education and the school vouchers. So we'll get more into that next week. Thank you all for joining us. Yes, thank you. Couldn't do it without you.